Thank you very much for the very clear presentation and balancing the different alternatives and possibilities. We will move on now to the next speaker, the third speaker, which is Ms. Carol Liao, who's going to talk about the catalytic innovation and the global emergency of hybrid legal structures.
Thank you very much. I'm incredibly pleased to be here in Oslo and to have this opportunity to present my reform proposal to you. As we can all see around us, there has been and continues to be a considerable amount of important research that's dedicated to reforming the shareholder primacy model of governance and lessening the negative effects that come from it. And indeed, this conference may be the best example of world-class research that's spearheading those reform efforts. And while these efforts are critical and they must continue, there are, as has been mentioned, considerable challenges that make true reformation of the model difficult. In addition to social, political, and economic barriers that may exist, the reform efforts also have to combat structural and rules-driven path dependence, as well as deeply entrenched ideological beliefs that have permeated the psyche of corporate practices in our global capital markets. And I say this not to discourage us, of course, but to highlight how corporate reform is quite complex and multifaceted solutions are going to be required. And for those of us seeking transformative change, it may be important to remember that there are alternative and innovative new avenues that may be able to supplement the pathway to true corporate reform and perhaps even contribute to destabilizing the status quo. Corporate social responsibility is really getting a facelift in the private sector. Mainstream corporations are still catching on to CSR, but the leaders that have been at the forefront of the movement are transforming the concept of CSR into one of social innovation and the integration of business concepts with social activism. The growth of the social enterprise, definition that has no legal meaning in my home country of Canada, which generally refers to a for-profit corporation trying to be socially good and do social good, or an enterprising nonprofit. The rapid growth of these social enterprises is really generating a legislative response in several countries. Legislators are just starting now to craft new corporations with legal features that are meaning to meet these growing demands from entrepreneurs that are originating from both the for-profit and the nonprofit sectors. And so we're now seeing the beginning of this international trend, this global emergence of hybrid legal structures, which is really creating this interesting new facet in the CSR movement. These corporate hybrids blend for-profit and nonprofit legal characteristics in their design to enable businesses to pursue both economic and social mandates and cultivate investors that are willing to limit their upside for the broader community interest. So you've heard, and you're going to hear from this panel greater detail on some of the hybrids that have appeared in the last decade, the UK Community Interest Company and the US Benefit Corporation, which has appeared more recently, and there are some others as well. And I certainly have some strong opinions on these hybrids, particularly as they relate to Canada, as we are in our early stages of implementation. But right now, I'd like to suspend my thoughts on those, and instead I want to take the opportunity to present a more macro perspective on this international trend and its potential impact in making sustainable companies happen. So it's quite understandable for most of us here, I'm sure, to regard this development of hybrids as simply addressing a niche sector of the market, right? The reality at this point, and in the foreseeable future, maybe forever, is that corporate hybrids will operate more as a small supplement relative to the mainstream corporate model and not one that's going to overtake it. But I'd like to promote a different and somewhat novel perspective on that by suggesting that this growing trend in corporate law may actually create disruptive innovations in the marketplace that promote social change and provide a backdoor mechanism of getting to where we want to go on the path to corporate reform. So to explain this phenomenon, I draw from the work of Joseph Bauer and Clayton Christensen, who are two Harvard business professors that in 1995 classified innovations into two categories, sustaining and disruptive. And corporations are drawn to sustaining innovations because they have proven to be profitable. You have the greatest profit margins when you can charge the highest prices to the most demanding and sophisticated customers at the top of the market. And what happens there is that the issue with this practice is that companies unintentionally leave the bottom tiers of the market open to disruptive innovations. A disruptive innovation allows a new population of consumers to access a product or service that previously was available only to wealthy or skilled consumers. And they improve a product or service in a way that the market doesn't expect. First, by designing for a different set of consumers in a new market, and then later by lowering the prices in an existing market. And while disruptive innovation is often used to describe technological advances, mobile phones, computers, these are just some examples, they're not isolated to that industry. And in fact, Christensen and a group of other scholars went on to describe a subset of disruptive innovations, catalytic innovations that are designed to address social change. And some of the qualities of catalytic innovations include the fact that they create systemic social change by scaling and replication, and were previously ignored or even disparaged by existing players in the market because the business model is regarded as unprofitable or otherwise unattractive. Examples of catalytic innovations include affordable insurance, walk-in medical clinics, micro-lending, and a personal favorite of mine is actually the work, you should check it out, of David Green, who's an Ashoka Fellow, and who has targeted underserved communities in developing countries to make medical technology affordable to some of the poorest people in the world. Millions that can never afford treatment can now see and hear because of his work to drive down prices in inocular lenses and hearing aids using a cost recovery model that is financially sustainable and profitable. He's now actually, because this is an environmental theme, I want to also say he's leading an initiative to make solar energy affordable to low-income communities. And he calls this compassionate capitalism and sustainability through profitability. And I call him a prime example of a catalytic innovator. Christensen and these scholars state that what is required is expanded support for organizations that are approaching social sector problems in a fundamentally new way and creating scalable, sustainable, and system-changing solutions. And I contend that hybrids are exactly the kind of support that they're talking about. Because the bottom tiers of the market offer lower gross margins, lower profit margins, smaller target markets, and simpler products and services, they're unattractive to incumbent competitors. And hybrids are actually better designed to address these bottom tiers because they have more financial flexibility. Profit is both legally and normatively not their only goal, and normatively too, right? Lower profit margins aren't going to scare hybrids away. Hybrid investors by nature are social investors, and the time pressure for quicker returns at the expense of long-term value is heavily dampened. So hybridity may actually put to test the ongoing research that's telling us that long-term vision, sustainability, multi-stakeholder collaboration is essential for ongoing growth and success in a firm. The increase of catalytic innovations in the marketplace by these hybrids would foster an environment where social and sustainable goods and services become more prevalent. And this would contribute to what one Harvard Business Review article calls the growing business megatrend of sustainability that is forcing fundamental and persistent shifts in how companies are competing with each other. Admittedly, this is an embryonic idea of mine that doesn't spring from traditional style reform efforts, but it doesn't seem so unreasonable for me to suggest that a well-designed hybrid is better positioned to house catalytic innovations for entrance into the marketplace and potentially improve the environment and society in ways that we just at this point cannot fully appreciate. The growth of international hybrids really signifies that there's something amiss with the mainstream corporate model and how we invest in it. And these are surprisingly formative years in corporate legal development as we're beginning to see the intersection of long-term value, sustainability, and corporate law. I think these next few decades are going to be very revealing as to the success or failure of these hybrids, and it'll be critical for there to be a stream of accompanying research to explore the possibility of enhancing socioeconomic development through the use of corporate law and hybrid corporate law, and hopefully dialogues like this one will contribute to the early stages in that development. Thank you very much.